we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Hello and welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Pip Thompson, and for the next 3 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. I'll keep you up to date on the stories that really matter to you. Coming up this hour. Aid trucks finally enter the Egypt-Gaza crossing with vital humanitarian supplies. But Britain's Foreign Secretary says it cannot be a one-off. Meanwhile, Israel says the number of hostages being held in Gaza is now 210. We'll have the latest live from Israel as it happens. With the eyes of the world on Gaza, what exactly is Iran up to? They've warned that any Israeli invasion of Gaza will have repercussions. So, how concerned should we really be? Oh dear, Rishi. After those 2 disastrous by-election results, are Tory MPs about to turn on their leader? Or does the Prime Minister still have time to turn it around? And do get in touch. Send me your thoughts on gbviews at gbnews.com, or you can message me on our socials. We're at GB News. First, let's get a full roundup of the headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Aid has started flowing into Gaza, with the Rafah crossing opening for the first time in 2 weeks. Trucks carrying supplies have been entering the strip, and more are now waiting to cross the border. Israel bombarded the territory and imposed a blockade, preventing the delivery of food, water and fuel after the Hamas terror attack on October the 7th. The group says today's delivery won't be enough to change the catastrophic medical conditions in Gaza. A peace summit is being held in Cairo. The Secretary-General in United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says Gaza needs more than aid trucks.
Full trucks on one side, empty stomachs on the other. Those trucks need to move as quickly as possible in a massive, sustained and safe way from Egypt into Gaza. A 20-truck convoy of the Egyptian Red Crescent is moving today. And I want to express my deep gratitude to Egypt for the essential role Egypt is playing in this regard. But the people of Gaza need a commitment for much, much more. A continuous delivery of aid to Gaza at the scale that is needed.
The Foreign Secretary is also in Egypt for the summit, addressing the escalating war between Israel and Hamas. James Cleverly is expected to tell the conference and that today's delivery of aid can't be a one-off. Earlier, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said Palestinians won't be forced from their land.
We will never accept this forcible displacement and will stand tall on our land despite the pivotal challenges. From day one, we have asked for the stopping of this barbarous aggression right away and to open up humanitarian corridors to allow humanitarian and relief aid to get into the Gaza Strip. But of course, the government of Israel didn't allow that.
Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has vowed to continue to fight until all hostages being held by Hamas are freed. It's after two American citizens, Judith Raanan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie, were released yesterday. Hamas says the decision was made on humanitarian grounds and was secured after an agreement with the Qatari government. It's believed more than 200 people are still being held by the terrorist group. Tens and thousands of Palestinian supporters are taking part in a march in London. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign says the protesters will be calling for an end to the violence in the Middle East and for the UK government to stop supporting Israel's actions. In other news, Storm Babet continues to pose a risk to life across some areas of the UK. Another red weather warning has been issued for parts of eastern Scotland following widespread flooding. An amber warning for rain is also in place across parts of England, with the Environmental Agency issuing 3 severe flood warnings in Derbyshire. Around 100,000 people were left without power as a result of the storm, with the majority now reconnected to the grid. Meanwhile, LNER customers are being advised not to travel due to widespread disruption. Weather expert Phil Morris says the storm is unprecedented. Storm Babet continues to pose a risk to life across some areas of the country. A red weather warning issued for parts of Aberdeenshire and Angus is due to the end at 6 p.m. this evening. And an amber warning for rain is in place across parts of England, with the Environmental Agency issuing 3 severe flood warnings. Now, recycling is to come to standards from 2026. The plan will see homes, businesses and schools recycling the same materials. There will also be a once-a-week minimum food waste collection to reduce the amount going to landfill. It's all part of the government's drive to simplify the process. Current recycling rates in England are just over 44%, which has been the same for the last decade. And this is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to GB News Saturday.
Sophia, thanks very much. Now, the Rafah crossing has now opened to allow the flow of aid into Gaza as the first trucks begin to deliver those much-needed humanitarian supplies to Gaza's 2 million-plus residents. The breakthrough comes as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is in Cairo for peace talks, but tanks and military personnel are still amassing near Gaza on that Israeli border as the world holds its breath for what could be an all-out ground offensive by Israeli military. Let's cross to our GB News reporter, Charlie Peters, who's in Tel Aviv. Charlie, good afternoon to you. Lots to talk about. Let's start, first of all, with the opening of this crossing. Do we know how long it's going to be open for? Is it only aid in? Are there any people that are going to be allowed out?
Well, this morning the US Embassy did refer to both the arrival of aid into the Gaza Strip and also warned of a potentially chaotic situation with regards to people leaving. But since then, I haven't had any confirmation about foreign nationals being allowed to leave the Gaza Strip, and we've sent questions to the various agencies and indeed embassies involved in that operation. But we did see some 20 trucks crossing in from the Egyptian side into the Gaza Strip this morning. They're understood to be carrying both medical supplies and medical equipment to restock and replenish those hospitals and humanitarian zones working in Gaza, and also food, high-powered biscuits, the sort that the UN deliver to crisis areas all over the world, because there are some 2 million people in Gaza facing this appalling humanitarian situation, which the IDF denies, but the UN delivering that food in order to supply as many people as possible. Just 20 trucks for 2 million people is certainly not a lot of aid, and the UN said it would just scratch the surface. Hamas also said it would not be a sufficient amount of aid to care for people under bombardment. But we've also had further commentary from this Cairo Peace Summit, also in Egypt, of course, where we've heard from King Abdullah of Jordan in the last half hour. He has denounced what he has described as a global silence around the world when it comes to the situation in the Gaza Strip. He said that to the Arab world, it feels as though Palestinian lives matter less than Israeli ones. Now, that will, of course, be met very sternly by some world leaders, especially in the West, who have been engaging with both Palestinian and Israeli leaders, both describing Israel's duty to defend itself, but also expressing concern for the situation in the Gaza Strip. In particular, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Foreign Secretary James Cleverly being in Cairo, both in the last few days, trying to conduct some humanitarian diplomacy there to get vital aid to the Gazans, but at the same time, of course, supporting Israel's duty, they say, to defend themselves. That's seen as a tacit support for a ground invasion as Israel gears up to do what it describes as the destruction of the Hamas military capabilities, starting in the north, but we believe also going on to that secondary objective further south, should that order come imminently. So a strong statement from King Abdullah of Jordan in Cairo, and that reflects the wider Arab mood, where there are still protests across the region. This morning in Ramallah, in the West Bank, the IDF said that they've now arrested some 670 Palestinians since the atrocities of October the 7th. Many of them, they say, suspected of belonging to or supporting the Hamas terror group. They also released some footage this morning that they claim is them destroying the home of a Hamas leader who was convicted of a killing in February. So rampeting up those tensions in the West Bank, but also throughout the Arab region where protests continue. Beirut, Baghdad, and in Libya, and in Cairo as well, where this peace summit is taking place. People are still extremely angry, giving Arab leaders very little room to maneuver. They're likely to stay on that same stance that they've been on since the explosion in North Gaza on Tuesday night.
Whilst I talk to you, Charlie, I just want to show some pictures, if we can, some drone footage of the latest destruction in Gaza. Israeli airstrikes, we are told, hitting a residential district. Please tell us the latest on the hostage situation, because the Israeli military has given a news conference earlier, and the number of hostages has increased.
That's right, so the figure has gone from 203 down to 201 last night when Hamas said they released 2 American hostages for humanitarian reasons. Well, in Israel, many people are saying that's still 201 being kept for inhumanitarian reasons. But they've now pushed that number up to 210, the IDF, according to new intelligence they've gathered from the situation in the Gaza Strip. Of course, as they delay that ground invasion, that's allowing more civilians, they say, to move south, but it's also allowing the Israeli military intelligence and local security forces to gain a better understanding of where those hostages are and gain more insight into where they may be within Gaza. Obviously, we're not privy to those operational details, but it's understood that the Israeli intelligence networks are extensive within even the Gaza Strip, so gaining more information day by day about where they are, and they have reaffirmed that it is a priority today in a press conference to recover those hostages. The EU and the US are understood to be urging Israel to delay its invasion in order to secure more diplomatic efforts to recover those hostages, and Qatar was instrumental in that operation last night. Indeed, the US and the UK and France thanked Qatar for their mediation efforts there. But in Israel, they say there will be no break in their efforts to continue to destroy the Hamas military capabilities. That invasion is still imminent.
Is there any cause for optimism? The fact that in the last few hours we saw, to the relief of their family, the American mother and daughter released. Does it mean that there is conversation, that there is hope that we could see more hostages be freed now?
Well, there are several realistic possibilities here. In one camp, yes, this is being seen as a potential diplomatic breakthrough, a mediation with the Qataris hosting to gain more insight and to possibly pull more Hamas actions where they release more hostages. But at the same time, some in Israel this morning saying that this is just a desperate propaganda effort by Hamas in order to delay that invasion. They want to delay the Israelis moving in and taking on their forces on the ground. Because for some corners of the world, some military and security analysts, they're saying that actually a ground invasion might be the more humanitarian role for the IDF to take here. As you've alluded to in those pictures we've been showing this morning and this afternoon of the destruction of Gaza City through those Israeli airstrikes, fighting on the ground with tanks and infantry would allow for more precise and targeted military action, so say the IDF. And so is this a deliberate action by Hamas to hold off on that operation, which could pierce into their defences more directly and prevent the destruction of civilian areas and indeed the appalling loss of civilian lives?
OK, Charlie, for the moment, thanks very much for that latest update from Tel Aviv. Back here, a massive pro-Palestinian march is happening in central London in protest against the Israeli bombardment of Gaza, as several countries move to ban the protests. Well, today's march has been organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, along with Friends of Al-Aqsa, Stop the War Coalition and the Muslim Association of Britain. We'll get the latest from that protest now. Our GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley is right across it. Olivia, what's the turnout been like? What is happening?
Yes, the march is just setting off now. The turnout is pretty big, as you can see, but it's smaller than last week. The police presence, though, is very high indeed. It's said that there are 1,000 police officers here today, and I can see quite a few of them here now. They have a challenge on their hands today, not only in making sure that this protest stays peaceful. Last week, there were 15 protesters arrested for disturbing the peace and minor acts of violence. Today, they are also trying to get a lid on the chanting problem. One issue that Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has drawn attention to is anti-Semitic chants happening at these rallies. One which has caused particular consternation is this repeated chant of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Now, to lots of British Jews, that is seen as an anti-Semitic slogan. But today, the Met Police have actually decided that they will let protesters go ahead with it, as long as they're not doing it in inflammatory areas or in front of a school or the Israeli embassy. Feelings are running high today, but overall it's a peaceful atmosphere. I'm seeing lots of children, I'm seeing lots of toddlers, but here's what some of the organisers had to say.
Well, despite the weather, we're anticipating today being joined by hundreds of thousands of people. There are coaches arriving from all across the UK. We're going to be joined today by the leaders of Britain's trade union movement, representing millions of British workers, by MPs, by members of civil society. We're all united in delivering today the same message. We want the violence to end, so we're calling for an immediate ceasefire so that necessary humanitarian aid can be safely delivered to the people of Gaza. We are here today to assert the truth that violence will ultimately not end until you address the root causes of violence, and that is Israel's decades-long imposition of a system of military occupation and apartheid upon the people of Palestine. And we are marching to Downing Street to deliver a message to our political leadership that you need to end your complicit support for this system of oppression, and you need to stop your green-lighting of Israel's commission right now of war crimes upon the people of Gaza.
So as you can see, the organisers of this march, they are calling for peace, but they are talking about the illegal occupation of Palestine, as they put it. We've seen lots of banners behind me echoing similar sentiments. This is likely to inflame tensions among British Jews and Palestinians here in the UK. But at the moment, at least, it feels as though this rally has less momentum to it than the rally last week, which will certainly be a relief for the Metropolitan Police.
Absolutely. Olivia Utley, live from Westminster. Thanks so much for that. Well, I want to talk about the geopolitical consequences of the war, because one of the main worries for Western nations is Iran, who themselves have warned Israel of a regional escalation if their military were to launch a ground invasion of Gaza. So should we be concerned by Iran, who've so far denied any involvement in Hamas attacks on Israel? Well, someone who's been analysing this, because he is a defence analyst, is Stuart Crawford. Good afternoon to you, Stuart. Thanks for talking to me this afternoon on GB News. What is your reading then? Does Iran really want to get directly involved in this conflict, or is it flexing its muscles?
Good afternoon. I think quite clearly the latter. The one thing that Iran does not want is to enter the conflict directly, because that will bring it into direct confrontation with the USA. And if push comes to shove, there will be only one winner in that contest, and it won't be Iran. But what it is doing is as you said, it's flexing its muscles. Is a big backer of Hezbollah in South Lebanon, as we all know, and it also backs the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And it's interesting that the USS Carney, a United States naval cruise anti-missile destroyer in the North Sea, the Red Sea, has knocked down several incoming missiles directed, we think, towards Israel from the Houthi rebels, and those weapons supplied by Iran. So yes, Iran is flexing its muscles, but I don't think it has any real desire at this point to become directly involved.
What would change that then for Iran to get directly involved?
Well, that's difficult to say. I think it would have to sense weakness on behalf of the USA to become involved in yet another war in the world, already deeply involved, obviously, in Ukraine and in Syria. And there's always the ongoing tension between Taiwan and China. And I think if Iran sensed that there was any sort of weakness in US resolve, then it might be persuaded to become directly involved in the Gaza conflict. But I think that's unlikely at the moment because the USA obviously has a massive deterrent force in its two carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean at the moment.
But of course, this what we keep talking about, this expected ground offensive in Gaza by the Israeli military, hasn't actually happened yet. If and when it does, do you expect Iran to respond in some way?
Well, it says it's going to respond, but I think that's probably just a bit of a bluff, actually. I've got no doubt that the Israeli military, the IDF, is absolutely champing at the bit to get started. But obviously the diplomatic interventions by President Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak and others has stayed their hand, if you like. But from a military point of view, they'll be raring to go and get on with this and get it completed as soon as they possibly can. I thought it would have started by now. It hasn't, but I can't see it lasting. I can't see it not starting within the next few days.
Do you think perhaps it was a case of the leaders have come in, Joe Biden, the German Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and now those diplomatic leaders, I know there's the peace summit in Cairo, but now those leaders have left. We did hear that President Macron might go, but we've heard no more about that. Is that, now they've departed, is that when we could see something happen?
Yes, I think that's. I mean, I think that any military action that the IDF had undertaken while Joe Biden's plane, Air Force One, was still on the tarmac would not have been a good look. But you talk about the peace conference in Cairo. It's interesting that neither the US or Iran, or indeed the UK, well, no, the UK has been represented by James Cleverly, but the US and Iran are not going to be there. So I don't think it's going to stop the Israelis doing what they need to do and what I suspect they want to do in the very near future.
And do you think this peace summit in Cairo can achieve anything? Like you say, some of the big people, they're not present there.
Yes, they're not, and in the final analysis, I think that whether we like it or not, or whether they like it or not, the US is the world's policeman, and people look to them to take the lead. And until the US comes down one way or other, and they've come down very firmly on the side of Israel against the Hamas terrorists, then I don't think there's any chance of this military action not happening. But in the end, all wars are ended by compromise and negotiation, and that will be the eventual end of this current conflict.
Defence analyst Stuart Crawford, really appreciate your insight this afternoon. Thanks so much for talking to me. You are watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. Plenty more coming up on today's show. In a moment, I'll be speaking with, well, a fierce defender of Boris Johnson for a discussion on the latest by-election disasters for the Prime Minister and the Conservatives in Tamworth and Bedfordshire. All of that and more to come. Do stay with us. This is GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday. I'm Pip Thompson. Now, Labour dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak this week by overturning two huge Conservative majorities in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire. Sir Keir Starmer claimed Labour was redrawing the political map by taking seats which had been comfortably Conservative ahead of the general election expected next year. In Mid-Bedfordshire, Alistair Strathern took the seat over his Tory rival. Well, what could this mean for the Prime Minister? Is he marching his party towards a 1997-style wipeout or worse? Well, joining me now is former Conservative member of the European Parliament, David Campbell-Bannerman. Good afternoon to you, David. Thanks for talking to me this afternoon. You'll remember that year very well, 1997 landslide. Do you think you're in danger of that happening again next year?
I'm afraid, yes, at the moment. I mean, the polling is terrible and these by-election losses are terrible. I fought in 97, I fought in 2001, and, we were out of power, the Conservatives, for 13 years. And I think the message, though, is what's happened is Conservative voters haven't turned up. In masses, 20,000 missing in all of these seats like Tamworth, Mid-Beds. And the lesson is, we've got to become more conservative again, cut taxes, get a grip of public spending, sort out immigration for real, grasp those Brexit opportunities. We saw today that the neutrality rules are going to stay, the EU neutrality rules, which will screw up a lot of housing developments. And that's outrageous. So we've got to be more Tory again, and then our voters will return, and it could mean that we could actually win the next election.
OK, David, but some people would say low turnout at the by-elections, that's a pretty feeble excuse. And turning it around, well, you ain't got long to do it, have you? Maybe a year, maybe 15 months? Yeah. It's nothing.
I mean, we have to hold the election by January 2025. Yeah. I mean, I think it's more likely to be in about a year's time. Yeah, it's tight. But as I say, the message is, if we don't become more conservative again, and these Tory voters don't turn up in large numbers in the general election, then we really do have a headache. We'll be worse than 97. Professor Curtis has said that. And that is outrageous. We lost 178 MPs in 97, went down to 165 total. You end up with a rump. And if it's worse than that, then we are in serious trouble. So, we've got to get Tory again, and we've got to get back to what we really stand for. And make clear that's what we do stand for. And in that year, it's possible to turn things around, but we've got to act quickly.
Some would blame Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister. Some would blame Partygate. All those events in 10 Downing Street while the rest of us were suffering. Could be a big part of this.
I don't buy it, because after 3 months of intense media attention after Partygate, we were only 2 to 4% behind in the polls. I mean, in his resignation speech, Boris Johnson, he refers to being a couple of points behind in the polls, and we're now minus 20 or worse. And I'm afraid, Rishi has got to get a grip on this. If he's going to stay, I think, he could be in big trouble. He's coming up to a year anniversary, and MPs might think, well, we're all going to lose our seats, so we might as well get rid of Rishi. And I think
do you think that's possible? Do you think that no confidence letters could be going in next week, and Rishi Sunak's position as Prime Minister is a bit perilous? And wouldn't that actually make it more perilous for the Tories, for Rishi Sunak to go barely a year before an election?
Well, I think it is perilous for Rishi. Remember, no one voted for him. The membership didn't vote for him, which is something the CDO, the Conservative Democratic Organisation I chair...
Yeah, but the membership voted for Liz Truss, and we know what happened there.
Well, you know, she actually did a lot of good, but she made a big mistake too far, as she said, economically. She did the right thing in the wrong way, and there was a terrible price to be paid. That's true. But let's not just throw away all that she did. She was right on the economy. Even Labour actually are following her appeal to have economic growth. But I do think Rishi, he's either got to really say we're going to become more conservative again and really mean it, or he's in trouble, I think, because Tory MPs are going to think we're all going to lose our seats. And to date, they've had their heads stuck in the sand. They haven't actually reacted to a lot of this. They think they're going to be saved by Rishi at the last moment. These two by-elections have said that's not going to happen. They are in serious trouble. They are getting seats if they don't. If the government doesn't change dramatically and get back to being Tory government, or, Rishi has got to go and you've got to get a leader that actually believes in those conservative policies again. That is, it's not likely, but it is feasible.
David, very finally, I just want a quick answer. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you understand the morale in the Tory party to be like at the moment?
-2.
Really?
I don't think it's even positive, I'm afraid. But, a lot of Conservative MPs have given up. They're resigned. It's a bit like, I call it the Hong Kong phenomenon, where they're just, waiting for the leftist hordes to march in, as in Hong Kong. And that is not good enough. We've got to fight. We don't want to be out of power for 10 years. I remember that as a Conservative, under Tony Blair, 13 years of Labour government. The damage it causes is enormous. So they've got to get their heads out of the sand, and they've got to do what is necessary, including challenging Rishi to do better or to go. OK. David
Campbell-Bannerman, former Conservative member of the European Parliament. Really appreciate your thoughts. Thanks ever so much. Well, you are watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. Lots more coming up on today's show. We will be discussing Storm Babet. Well, all this footage that we've been seeing, absolutely terrible for many parts of the UK, including in eastern Scotland and now in Chesterfield in Derbyshire, where hundreds of houses have been flooded. That and much more to come. First, your latest headlines with Sophia.
It's 12:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Aid has started flowing into Gaza, with the Rafah crossing opening for the first time in 2 weeks. Trucks carrying supplies have been entering the strip, and more are now waiting to cross the border. Israel bombarded the territory and imposed a blockade, preventing the delivery of food, water and fuel after the Hamas terror attack on October the 7th. The group says today's delivery won't be enough to change the catastrophic medical conditions in Gaza. The Foreign Secretary is in Egypt for a summit to discuss the escalating war between Israel and Hamas. James Cleverly is expected to tell the peace conference more needs to be done to allow humanitarian relief into Gaza, and that today's delivery can't be a one-off. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has vowed to continue to fight until all hostages being held by Hamas are freed. It's after 2 American citizens, Judith Raanan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie, were released yesterday. Hamas says the decision was made on humanitarian grounds and was secured after an agreement with the Qatari government. In the UK, Storm Babet continues to pose a risk to life across some areas of the country. A red weather warning issued for parts of Aberdeenshire and Angus is due to end at 6 o'clock this evening. An amber warning for rain is in place across parts of England, with the Environmental Agency issuing 3 severe flood warnings in Derbyshire. And you can get more of all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com. Now, back to you.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Hello, welcome back. The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and South Gaza has now opened finally to deliver aid to the people of Gaza as numerous countries try to resolve this brewing Middle Eastern crisis. And the Israeli military has now revised its number of hostages held by Hamas to 210. It was 203, but of course we do know the mother and daughter were released last night, don't we? And there are still those expectations of an imminent ground invasion by Israel into Gaza. Let's get the view of Israeli journalist Yotam Confino. Good afternoon to you, Yotam. Thanks for talking to us. That crossing finally open, but a lot more aid is needed. It doesn't scratch the surface, does it?
No, it doesn't. And about 200 trucks are actually waiting now on the Egyptian side of the border just to go in. But what we heard from President Biden is that only 20 trucks per day will be allowed to go in. That will take a long time just to get through the trucks that are already waiting with medicine, food, and water. And of course, there's this constant looming threat of the border being shut again. If any pictures emerge from the Gaza Strip of Hamas taking the aid, as in if you see pictures of Hamas with food from the countries that have supported this humanitarian assistance, this will mean that Israel will shut the border. So it's a very risky operation, and it's practically impossible to prevent Hamas from at least getting some of this aid, because we do know that there are plenty of people in Gaza that support Hamas. So it's a very risky operation. We don't know how long this border crossing will remain open, and we don't also know if people with dual citizenship will be allowed to go from Gaza into Sinai, into Egypt. That's something that a lot of countries have been working hard to ensure, but we still don't know if that's going to be possible.
Yeah, and the other big news so far today is that the number of hostages, that's now been revised upwards to 210. The mother and daughter that were released last night, such wonderful scenes to see them safe and sound. Do you think that offers a glimmer of hope that more hostages could be released in the coming days? And will Israel hold off their invasion for that to happen?
First of all, I do think that it offers hope. Most families in Israel are, of course, hopeful. They refuse to give up hope. They put pressure on the government to give Hamas whatever they ask for. They don't care what they get. They just want their daughters, their sons, and their grandparents back. But this is also sort of a psychological warfare from Hamas. Hamas is now giving a little bit of a treat, so to say, just to show that it says that it's being humanitarian. I think that's a bit laughable given what they just committed of atrocities on the Israeli side. But Hamas is really trying now to show the world that it is playing ball. If humanitarian aid comes in, then it will release hostages, even though those two things haven't actually been connected. We haven't gotten that confirmed that it was a demand from Hamas to get humanitarian aid in, or that Israel and the United States agreed to it. And the second thing you asked about the ground invasion, I don't see Israel halting any sort of ground invasion. If Israel would have had a different tactic from the beginning, saying we will get the hostages out no matter what, even if we have to release 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, they would have done it, but they haven't, and they stick with the ground invasion. So I don't think this is going to hold it at all.
And we were just seeing more smoke over Gaza as we were talking to you there. People that you speak to around you in Tel Aviv, is opinion still very much behind this military action by Israel? Or as the death toll rises in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis deepens, does that desire for military action, is that reduced slightly?
No, it's overwhelming majority of Israelis support this ground invasion. And for a couple of reasons. First of all, what happened here is reminiscent of the Holocaust, and Israel cannot and will not accept that Hamas gets away with it. So there is, first of all, a strong urge of revenge, of once and all eradicating Hamas, removing it. And the civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip is, of course, a huge issue, but Israelis also say, wait a minute. First of all, Hamas committed atrocities on our side. Second of all, we still have 210 people, at least, held hostage, a baby 9 months old, and elderly. So we can't start being concerned about civilians that are being used as human shields by Hamas. We can't take care of both the Palestinian civilians, our own civilians, and in the meantime, fight an uneven warfare with Hamas. It's simply not possible. So Israelis are not, that's not their main priority. Their main priority is to get the hostages out and to eradicate Hamas.
Yeah, I do understand that. I just wonder whether it has, I guess, any impact on people in Israel when they see the impact of the airstrikes on Gaza. It's very easy to see the people that are injured. I saw in some awful video footage, which I probably should have not watched, but a dead baby being wrapped up and taken away. We're all human beings, aren't we, Yotam?
Absolutely. I'm also affected. Everyone's affected. You have to be very, very cold to not care at all. So, of course, people care. But again, it's a dilemma for Israel because they've seen this over and over with Hamas hiding behind civilians, Israel trying to kill them, and the casualties just rise. So Israelis they know that this is just a situation. What can you do? Either you go after Hamas and civilians will die, or you don't. You let them get away with it, and you just stand on the other side of the border and try to negotiate with terrorists. It's not possible. And I think a lot of Israelis also say, I know that. They also point to the United States, the United Kingdom, many other countries that invaded Afghanistan and Iraq and say, wait a minute, you were hunting terrorists. Look how many civilians died there. Why are we the ones being held accountable when we're trying to only target Hamas terrorists?
It's just so incredibly difficult, though, isn't it, to target only Hamas terrorists, knowing how they operate, knowing how they put themselves amongst the civilian population. Only targeting them is next to impossible.
It's absolutely impossible. And listen, for those who still think that Hamas have a shred of decency left in them and they actually care about the Palestinian people, the two biggest examples of why that's not the case in the last week is, first of all, Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader who sits comfortably in Qatar, has said no civilians in Gaza are to leave any of their homes. Stay where you are. It doesn't matter if it's a war zone. It doesn't matter if you get killed. Stay. Khalid Mashal, who is also one of the leaders, said we are willing to sacrifice countless numbers of Palestinians to eradicate Israel. And thirdly, we heard the United Nations earlier this week say that Hamas had stolen energy resources from them and stolen medicine. They deleted that tweet after. We don't know if that's because they were threatened, but they didn't retract the statement. They didn't say it didn't happen. They just deleted the tweet. So this is just a terrorist organization keeping 2 million people hostages, keeping hundreds of Israelis and foreign nationals hostages, and committing some of the worst atrocities we've seen in the 21st century. So yes, Israel does care about civilians. There's no doubt about it. But they care about their own people first. They need to get their people out first, kill Hamas, and then hopefully avoid as many civilian casualties as possible.
Can we also just look at the northern border, the northern Israeli border with Lebanon, because we've got this cross-border fire continuing there. Is there a nervousness about Israel now getting involved, the Israeli military, on multiple fronts? And how big is the Israeli military? Is it big enough to deal with that? Will it not be spreading itself thin?
It's a very good question. I would say under normal circumstances, if Israel were not engaged in this massive warfare against Hamas, Israel would be very ready to take on Hezbollah. And they would have also gone to war with Hezbollah already. Hezbollah has crossed so many lines for Israel, firing rockets repeatedly, almost on a daily basis, killing Israelis with anti-tank missiles. But because the situation at the Gaza border requires so many Israeli soldiers, Israel has still not engaged in full warfare with Hezbollah. But absolutely, that is the main concern. Israel believes it can handle Hamas in Gaza because it's a much weaker entity than Hezbollah. A war with Hezbollah will be a catastrophe because it will mean hundreds of thousands of rockets fired from Lebanon all across Israel, many people who don't have bomb shelters, and their missiles are precision guided. They're much, much bigger than what Hamas has. But Israel keeps relying on the United States, and especially Joe Biden, who has repeatedly said, don't take advantage of this situation. He's sending this message to Hezbollah and Iran. So Israel hopes that the United States will help if it gets to a point of a war, but whether it will actually go in with ground troops, that's a whole different issue. So yes, it's a lot of worrying, lots of tension, and it's much more dangerous what's happening on the northern border, actually.
Interesting. Israeli journalist Yotam Confino, always appreciate your contributions to GB News. Thank you so much. Well, back here, the devastation from Storm Babet is continuing. Numerous more red warnings are issued for England and flooding in numerous towns and villages. There are currently, in England alone, 300 flood warnings. And this is Chesterfield that you're looking at. What's been described as biblical levels of rainfall. I'm not sure that that truck driver was being completely sensible driving through that. But yeah, so much rainfall, residents waking up to flooding throughout the town. In a moment, we are hoping to speak to meteorologist John Hammond, but Let me just continue showing you these pictures because they really are quite dramatic. River levels, officials are warning, are continuing to rise due to Storm Babet. There is a risk to life in some areas. 3 people have died since the storm hit the UK on Wednesday, and there is a search continuing in Aberdeenshire. That's parts of eastern Scotland where there is still a red weather warning in place until 6 o'clock this evening. There's reports of a man trapped in a vehicle in floodwater. The Environment Agency is saying there is severe flood warnings in place around the River Derwent in Derbyshire. These pictures are also from Chesterfield in Derbyshire. A school bus, look at that, flooded, which obviously caused a lot of concern amongst the youngsters on that. They were all safe and sound. But there is this continuing risk of serious injury and a serious disruption to local communities. So, John Hammond, I think you are with us now, meteorologist. Thanks ever so much for talking to us. Yeah, just looking at those pictures, absolutely dreadful, the effect that it's having on communities. Just tell us overall what the overall picture is at the moment and how much longer we're in this danger zone, if you like.
Well, first, the good news, and across England, there are now no more rain warnings in force. They have lapsed and they're unlikely to return. So it's a mopping up process which is beginning across those flood-stricken parts of East Anglia, the Midlands, and up into northern England. Having said that, of course, there's always a lag between it stopping raining and all that water then working its way down through the river systems, which is why we have 3 severe flood warnings in force along stretches of the River Derwent. The Derwent flows into the Trent, and the Trent then flows into the Wash. So it'll be a while yet before the alarm is lowered for these large river systems, these large catchments across eastern England. But the good news, as I say, is that the persistent heavy rain has now eased across England. Different story, though, for Scotland. This is where Storm Babet first reared its head, and this is where it'll be last to loosen its grips. We still have a severe weather warning in force for parts of Aberdeenshire into Angus. And here, several more hours of heavy rain and several more tens of millimetres. A good few places here will have had over 200 millimetres of rain when all is said and done. Now, that is a colossal amount of water. That's an historic rainfall event. Yes, these rainfall events have happened through history. Occasionally, we get these sorts of freak weather storms, but the fact is they're becoming more frequent, they're becoming more extreme as our climate begins to warm. But I must stress that the worst is now over across those flood-stricken parts of England, in as much as it's stopping raining, but it will take a while for those river levels to ease down. For Scotland, it's going to take longer. And although we will have a respite, i.e. tomorrow will be a mostly dry day, as we go into next week, it looks like more heavy rain will return. So there's no sign of a prolonged drier spell. So that will cause some concern for many who have been hit by the flood, the prospect that there'll be more rain at times as we go next week.
Yeah, because there's people like me who much prefer the autumn to be, cold and sunny rather than wet and mild. But it really is very mild at the moment.
Very mild. And what's happened, the bigger picture, why we've had Storm Babet is that actually unusually cold air has been pushing down across Scandinavia. That's been meeting the mild, moist air pushing up from the south. And where those two air masses have met, the weather front has become stuck. It's become stuck across the north and east of Britain. And really, it's not until those contrasting air masses start to sort of weaken that weather front will dissolve. And it is beginning now to dissolve away, that front, which means the threat of prolonged and heavy rain beginning to ease. But yeah, the big picture of cold air coming down from the north and warm air pushing up from the south is something which is likely to recur again in the week ahead. So if I were you, and if you're watching at the moment, I'd keep a very close eye on the weather forecast over the next few days, because the more widespread picture is still pretty volatile, with the prospect of further heavy rain over the next week or so.
And people shouldn't be an idiot, should they, like we've seen in some pictures, and try and drive through these flood waters. I mean, it's just crackers.
It's crackers, and it's selfish as well. I mean, yeah. I've seen some crazy footage of lorries driving through these floodwaters and causing mayhem all around with the bow waves. You're showing one such picture there. Yeah, it's stupid because you never know when you drive into these floodwaters just how deep that water is. And so, yeah, the very sound advice is to stay away from floodwaters. And of course, as I mentioned at the start, although it may have stopped raining where you are, that doesn't mean that the floodwaters are going to automatically recede. In some places, flood levels, river levels will actually rise over the next day or so as all that water funnels its way down before it eventually reaches
John.
the sea.
Thanks so much. I've got to wrap you up because we need to get off. We need to go to a break. But thank you so much for your expertise telling us about Storm Babet. Do stay with us. We're back in a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. Okay, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Pip Thompson, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. I'll keep you up to date on the stories that really matter to you. Coming up this hour, aid trucks finally enter the Egypt-Gaza crossing with vital humanitarian supplies. Britain's Foreign Secretary says it cannot be a one-off. Meanwhile, Israel says the number of hostages being held in Gaza is now 210. We've the latest live from Israel. 3 people have now died and at least 40,000 homes without power as Storm Babet hits Britain. A second red weather alert in a week is in place in eastern parts of Scotland. Torrential rain is forecast for the rest of the UK. Can Rishi Sunak survive? Following 2 disastrous by-election results, could Tory MPs be turning on their leader? Or will they show loyalty and hope the Prime Minister can turn their fortunes around? Do get in touch, send me your thoughts on GB Views at gbnews.com, or you can message me on our socials. We're at GB News. First, let's get a roundup of all the news headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon, it's 1:01. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The UK has called on Israel to show military restraint with its war with Hamas. These are live pictures of Gaza where smoke can be seen billowing on the skyline. Addressing a peace summit in Cairo, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said he's spoken to the Israeli government about its duty to respect international law and the importance of preserving civilian lives in Gaza. Meanwhile, aid has started flowing into Gaza, with the Rafah crossing opening for the first time in 2 weeks. Trucks carrying supplies have been entering the strip and more are waiting to cross the border. Israel bombarded the territory and imposed a blockade, preventing the delivery of food, water and fuel after the Hamas terror attack in October the 7th. The group says today's delivery won't be enough to change the catastrophic medical conditions in Gaza. A peace summit is there being held in Cairo, and the Secretary-General of United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says Gaza needs much more than aid trucks.
Full trucks on one side, empty stomachs on the other. Those trucks need to move as quickly as possible in a massive, sustained and safe way from Egypt into Gaza. A 20-truck convoy of the Egyptian Red Crescent is moving today. And I want to express my deep gratitude to Egypt for the essential role Egypt is playing in this regard. But the people of Gaza need a commitment for much, much more. A continuous delivery of aid to Gaza at the scale that is needed.
Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has vowed to continue to fight until all hostages being held by Hamas are freed. It's after 2 American citizens, Judith Raanan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie, were released yesterday. Hamas says the decision was made on humanitarian grounds and was secured after an agreement with the Qatari government. It's believed that more than 200 people are still being held by the terrorist group. Tens and thousands of Palestinian supporters are taking part in a march in London. The Palestinian Solidarity Campaign says the protesters will be calling for an end to the violence in the Middle East. Campaign director Ben Jamal says the UK government needs to stop supporting Israel's actions.
We want the violence to end, so we're calling for an immediate ceasefire so that necessary humanitarian aid can be safely delivered to the people of Gaza. We are here today to assert the truth that violence will ultimately not end until you address the root causes of violence, and that is Israel's decades-long imposition of a system of military occupation and apartheid upon the people of Palestine. And we are marching to Downing Street to deliver a message to our political leadership that you need to end your complicit support for this system of oppression.
Storm Babet continues to pose a risk to life across some areas of the country. A red weather warning issued for parts of Aberdeenshire and Angus is due to end at 6 p.m. this evening. An amber warning for rain is in place across parts of England, with the Environmental Agency issuing 3 severe flood warnings in Derbyshire. Recycling in England will be standardised from 2026. The plan will see homes, businesses and schools recycling the same materials. There will also be a once-a-week minimum food waste collection to reduce the amount going to landfill. It's all part of the government's drive to simplify the process. Current recycling rates in England are just over 44%, which has been the same for the last decade. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to GB News on Saturday.
Thanks very much, Sophia. Now let's go back to the Rafah crossing, which has opened on the Egyptian side to allow the flow of aid into Gaza, those first trucks delivering vitally needed supplies to Gazans' 2 million residents. The breakthrough comes as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is in Cairo for peace talks. At those peace talks is also the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, who has been speaking there, and he has called for the world leaders to come together to prevent conflict from spreading further. James Cleverly described the situation as divisive and polarising. The Israeli military, meanwhile, says there are now 210 hostages in Gaza, so the Israeli military has revised that figure upwards. Let's cross live to GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who is in Tel Aviv. Charlie, the Israeli military, I think, has been giving another briefing, saying that the aid shipments that are going now into Gaza finally, they do not include fuel, they say.
Yes, I think it's understood that it's just medical supplies, medical equipment and food. So the very basics to sustain the people on the ground. But also at the same time, we have heard from doctors at some of the 24 hospitals at least operating in Gaza that they are relying on fuel for the generators to fund their hospitals, to keep them on running for energy. As we know, there has been an electricity blockade in the Gaza Strip for some time now, and in particular since this conflict started on October the 7th, with Israel reacting strongly to the atrocities committed in southern Israel. But at the same time, further away from the Sinai Peninsula, where that aid is entering into the Gaza Strip, James Cleverly calling on world leaders, as you say, to prevent an escalation in the regional conflict as Israel prepares to launch that ground invasion into Gaza. And it comes about 5 hours after we heard reports that the US intelligence community understands that Iran is not intending to commit to direct action against the US military. It is instead keen to continue to sustain and posture its proxies in the region, but the US is not anticipating that Iran is keen on a direct impact with US forces. This comes after several reported strikes on US bases in both Iraq and Syria, and the US destroyer in the Red Sea intercepting a missile we believe that was fired by the Iran-backed but not Iran-controlled Houthi militia in Yemen. So that's a significant intervention there as people gather in Cairo on this peace summit to try and prevent the escalation of this conflict, but also many Arab leaders there trying to prevent the conflict from continuing whatsoever. They want ceasefire, they want the IDF to not go in, but at the same time, in that IDF press conference that you were just alluding to, we have heard that the plans have been formalised and approved for that imminent ground invasion. So there really is no going back at this point when it comes to that ground invasion. It feels almost certain that it will come in the next few days now, and it comes after Yoav Gallant, the IDF and the Israeli defense minister, yesterday said that the troops could see Gaza from afar but would soon see it from the inside, and set out his three-point plan for that invasion after much criticism in Israel that the Israeli side did not have an end state in mind with their invasion.
Turning to the hostages, Charlie, we saw Judith and Natalie Ranan being released last night, mother and daughter. Some people say that is a glimmer of hope now. What's your reading of the situation?
Yes, I'm seeing it as a positive example of the diplomatic efforts conducted via Qatar, that mediator, of course, for hostage release. And Qatar has run that role in several other situations in recent years, in particular in Russia, in Ukraine, and also in Africa. But at the same time, while they have been receiving praise in Doha for that operation, there is some concern in Israel that the hostage release was merely a propaganda tool by Hamas. There is even concern among the media about whether or not they would immediately report on the hostage release, because Hamas has been releasing information about hostages since the start of this conflict, and it's so hard to verify, of course, information released by a prescribed terror organization. So it's uncertain at this point for many observers and analysts in the region what this release of 2 hostages means. The IDF is still gathering information about the number of hostages inside Gaza, and as you said, it's revised that number up to 210. It thinks that over half of them are alive and at least 20 of them are children. It's also important to note that they are American hostages released, so clearly many are receiving this as a pointed direct release to engage with President Biden, who is of course the main military supporter and indeed diplomatic supporter of Israel's efforts. But that is also feeding into the view, very popular here in Israel among the establishment and indeed the general public, that it's a propaganda effort, not much of a glimmer of hope for the wider release. If they're going to release two, there are plenty more they could release today as well.
And what about the northern border with Israel, Charlie, that cross-border fire continuing? Is there still a lot of concern in Israel about the threat posed by Hezbollah?
Well, the IDF says that it's extremely confident that it will do everything it can and will succeed in defending its northern border, but there is wider regional concern, and the bullishness from the IDF does not match the confidence expressed by many security agencies in the region, and many people being asked to evacuate from Lebanon right now as they anticipate a heightening of the hostilities there, and potentially also a move for the IDF to conduct preemptive action further north from that border region. Both the Netherlands and the Belgians evacuated their citizens from Lebanon. Yes, they ordered an evacuation. People should leave immediately, and there is growing concern that the hostilities there will travel north, potentially into the urban areas. We have seen Israel launching what it has been described as preemptive action on Syrian airports, and there are concerns that they might attempt to do the same on the international airport in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Overnight, the IDF said that a 22-year-old staff sergeant and a reservist had been killed in the north in clashes with the Lebanese Hezbollah group there in anti-tank guided missile strikes. And in the last hour, we've also had information from the IDF who say that they have conducted shelling on Hezbollah positions. So that conflict still raging on as forces gather on the south.
Charlie, thanks very much for that update. We will come back to you, of course, with the latest. A massive pro-Palestinian march is occurring in central London this afternoon in protest against the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. Several European countries are moving to ban the protests as well. Well, today's march has been organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, along with other groups, including Friends of Al-Aqsa, Stop the War Coalition and Muslim Association of Britain. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Olivia Utley, our GB News political correspondent, who is at the protest. How is it going so far? The main concern, Olivia, seems to be the chanting. And what powers will police have to carry out arrests if that chanting happens?
Well, absolutely. At the moment, it's certainly a spirited rally, but from what we've seen so far, there haven't been signs of violence. That said, the police has a really big challenge on its hands today because there are actually two rallies happening simultaneously. There's the main rally, which we're at right now, and there's also a splinter rally by a more pro-Hamas group, which is protesting between the Egyptian and Turkish embassies. Now, the police, there are 1,000 police officers on hand, but having to police two different rallies at the same time obviously presents difficulties. As you mentioned there, Pip, the chanting is what's causing the most controversy at the moment. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has ordered the Met Police to crack down on any anti-Semitic slogans being used. And one slogan, which was used last week, was this chant of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Now, to Palestinians, that's a harmless expression that they would like to see, as they put it, Israeli oppression liberated. But for lots of Jews living in Britain and beyond, it's seen as an anti-Semitic slogan. Today, the Metropolitan Police have said that they will not arrest anyone using this slogan unless they're using it in an inflammatory way, so in front of an Israeli embassy or in front of a Jewish school. At the moment, during this rally, but as I say, this is only one of two rallies, the slogans don't seem to be veering into that territory. We've heard lots of free Palestine. We've heard Israel is a terrorist state. But we haven't heard anything more inflammatory than that at the moment. Really, really big challenge for the police. You can probably see some police in the background. I've seen a lot of them around today, but it's a very, very big event to try and police.
Indeed, and of course there was concerns, wasn't there, last weekend about the stage, the pro-Palestinian stage that was erected near the cenotaph. That caused so much controversy. Could that possibly happen again today?
So the Metropolitan Police have decided that this time they will not allow that stage to be erected so close to the cenotaph because, as you say, it caused widespread offence. The stage will now be in King Charles Street, which is a road parallel to Whitehall. There are also other conditions that the Metropolitan Police have put in place to try and make sure that the rally this week is quieter than the one last week. The protesters are only allowed to follow one specific route, and anyone who deviates from that route is under risk of being arrested. The numbers this week, although you can see they're pretty large, do seem to be smaller than this week, which will be a relief to the Metropolitan Police because the groups organising these rallies plan to do them every Saturday for the foreseeable future.
OK, Olivia Utley, political correspondent, thanks ever so much for talking to us from that protest in central London. Well, staying with all this, because the level of anti-Semitism in Europe increased by 1,200%. That is according to the chairman of the European Jewish Association. The Israel-Hamas war has seen a huge rise in anti-Semitism, like this synagogue that was attacked in Berlin that we're showing you pictures of now. Plus, in the UK alone, between the 1st and the 18th of October, the Metropolitan Police say they saw 218 anti-Semitic offences compared to 15 in the same period last year. Well, joining me now is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Webster Vienna Private University, Ralph Scholhammer. Good afternoon, Ralph. Thanks ever so much for talking to me. The last 2 weeks, I mean, they have been indescribable on so many levels. What's your overview of it?
I mean, this is very hard to say, but I think we have to look the facts straight into the face. What we are currently witnessing is the beginning of the end of Jewish life in Western Europe. I mean, this is a numbers game. Just to take Great Britain as an example, Britain has 400,000 Jews and 4 million Muslims. We have similar demographics in France and Germany. So in the future, to whose demands do you think policymakers will be more sensitive? So unless you want to risk a civil war-like scenario in your own cities, officially supporting Israel and your Jewish communities will come with an ever higher price tag that fewer and fewer politicians will be willing to pay. We already had terror attacks over the last couple of days in Belgium, in France, in the UK, security alerts to pretty much all Jewish institutions all over continental Europe. And even in the past, I mean, why do you think Europe has been paying Hamas all this money in the past? It has been a kind of a protection racket like the mafia did in the past in Italy. We kept paying them in the hope that they will not tell their supporters in European cities to riot. And now this is coming to an end.
OK, well, we can't absolutely analyse and verify exactly what you just said there about Europe paying Hamas so much money. But did I hear you right that you said this is the beginning of the end of Jewish life in Europe? Did you say that?
In Western Europe.
In Western Europe. I mean,
in Western Europe, absolutely.
That's a quite staggering conclusion to draw now.
Well, not really. I mean, we have polls, for example, out of France, where over 52% of Jews say that they want to leave the country. 70% say they don't think that Judaism has a future in France. And we have similar numbers out of other European countries. Jewish life in Europe has been under attack over the last couple of decades. As I said, I know this is a painful topic and we don't like to speak about it, but we need to talk about these facts. It is very difficult in Western Europe to be Jewish. There has not been a single mass rally in support of either what we usually call Western values or of the Jewish community. But they have massive rallies in support, some of them of Palestine, which I would argue is fine, but also in support of Hamas. We had chants in Germany, Jews, Jews, Jews into the gas. How do you want to live there in the future as part of the Jewish community if the community that holds these views over the last couple of years has been growing? We have more anti-Semitism today than we had 10, 15, 20 years ago. As I said, a painful topic, but we have to look the facts straight into the eye.
You're based in Vienna. What is it like there?
Well, we had similar situations. I, in fact, live in the 2nd district, which is the last Jewish district in Vienna. And on October 7th, we had people driving through the district with Palestinian flags out of their cars. We had some demonstrations in public spaces in the Vienna city center that actually were not allowed, but they took place nonetheless. And the police couldn't do anything about it. And again, none of these demonstrations was pro-Israel. None of these demonstrations was for the Jewish community. None of these demonstrations were pro, quote unquote, Western values. So we kind of see where the energy of the future is. And this is, you must always imagine you're a Jew in Vienna and you see that people who openly hate you, who openly chant that they want to get rid of you. And basically the public, the police, the political institutions are entirely helpless facing the threat. You will consider leaving. And the question is, where can they go in the future?
I mean, you might have seen the pictures we're seeing today of the pro-Palestinian protest taking place in London today. People have the right to protest, do they not? If they are pro-Palestine, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're anti-Jewish if they're pro-Palestine. They can be peaceful.
Well, absolutely they can be peaceful. But I think we have been playing this game now for 23 years. If somebody goes out and participates in a demonstration where people have, little stickers that has the parachuter on it that dropped into the concert in Israel where people were slaughtered, if people rip down signs of missing children that have been abducted by Hamas, if you participate in such a demonstration, I think it's very difficult to say, well, I'm just here for peaceful reasons. I don't really have any problem with Jews and the Israelites. I just happen to be in the vicinity of those people. I think this is a little bit, we delude ourselves. We have polls, just to give you one number, right? In Saudi Arabia, only 7% of the population would allow the visit of an Israeli prime minister. So anti-Semitism in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, is something that exists. Again, right, I know everybody says, how can you say this? We cannot say this, but we have been playing this game now for a very, very long time to pretend as if this is not here. At some point, we have to accept. We say that normal Jewish life is possible. How? Look at France. Every single school, every Jewish school needs police protection. People are told in Germany, in Austria, don't wear the kippah, don't wear any kind of symbols that make you identifiable as a Jew. If you tell people that, you cannot tell me that this is part of normal life. You can, in some areas, in the urban areas of Western Europe, Eastern Europe is different. In the urban areas of Western Europe, it's becoming harder and harder to live a normal Jewish life. And we know where the threat is coming from. The German interior minister has now admitted that in the past, they counted every anti-Semitic incident that was not openly from the left as being from the right. Now they finally, after 30 years, they will start to differentiate between right-wing, neo-Nazi anti-Semitism and actual religiously, ethnically motivated anti-Semitism. We have been putting this problem under Iraq, and now it is quote-unquote exploding into our face.
OK, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Webster Vienna Private University, Ralph Scholhammer. Thank you for your thoughts today. Really appreciate that. It will make many people think. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. Plenty more coming up on today's show. We're going to get the latest on this chaos, this misery that's being caused by Storm Babet, with officials warning it's posing a risk to life in some areas. There's train operators now around the UK who are warning people not to travel, and river levels are continuing to rise amid all this rainfall. So do stay with us. We'll bring you the latest.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Bringing you the latest on Storm Babet, because train operators around the UK are advising customers not to travel today due to the widespread disruption. Now, that's LNER, Avanti West Coast and Northern Rail. They've all warned against travelling. And LNER says there is an extremely limited service in place due to flooding between Doncaster and Wakefield. River levels are continuing to rise, Storm Babet posing a risk to life in some areas. And we've also heard today that the England footballer Trent Alexander-Arnold's been involved in an accident after a 40-foot electricity pylon smashed onto a car in front of him. That's believed to be due to all this bad weather. Well, here to tell us more is weather journalist Nathan Rao. We're not being over-dramatic, are we, Nathan, when we talk about there being a risk to life here?
No, we're not. And this is why the Met Office issued this red weather warning on Friday, which they have since extended through until 6 p.m. this evening. We often talk about the Met Office issuing warnings for weather. They don't issue red weather warnings lightly. This means there is a danger to life and certainly a danger of disruption within the warning area, which is still in place across eastern Scotland until this evening. And there are also some other amber, slightly lower level of warning and yellow warnings across that region, which has already seen a lot of rain in the last 24 hours and is going to see another 4 inches of rain before that warning expires. And this is why we're seeing a lot of problems. And the Met Office, together with other authorities in Scotland, are warning people to don't travel in the region unless it is absolutely necessary. Certainly check if you're travelling by rail, because ScotRail has said there are services which are going to be unavailable, while engineers still check the routes are safe. And also the Scottish Environment Protection Agency is again warning people, do not drive, walk or go visiting places which are flooded, because as we've seen, they are dangerous and people can lose their lives.
Nathan, just talk us through the main areas that are worst affected at the moment. We've got eastern Scotland, haven't we? We've got parts of the East Midlands. I think that's Scotland you were just looking at there. Chesterfield, we know, is very badly affected. And now I've seen there's a severe flood warning, which is a danger to life. That's been issued for a village in Powys in Wales.
Yes. Now, originally, I mean, the main impact of this storm, or certainly the rain from this storm and the warnings for this storm, are, of course, over Scotland, and that is eastern Scotland. And we're talking about Angus, Grampian, Aberdeenshire. Those are the places most at risk. But also the English Environment Agency has got a number of severe flood warnings, flood alerts and flood warnings across that region that you talked about, as this storm, which is mainly across the east of the country, Derby. You also mentioned Wales, actually, so it's coming in from west, but the whole of the country really is suffering from this slow-moving storm. There are also some other sort of stormy weather systems all working together across the country to bring a general pattern of very, very wet weather. Now, it is worth checking if you are travelling or if you're looking at the weather to look at the Met Office website, which will specify the exact regions that are most at risk, and also the English Environment Agency and, of course, SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. They will give you exact locations. But this storm really is causing heavy rainfall and flooding really across large parts of the country through until this evening. And even though it's expected to pass by tomorrow, there are going to be some residual hangover effects as this storm passes through before it turns calmer towards the end of the weekend and into Monday.
OK, so at this time of year, where are we? Mid-October. How unusual is it to see this sort of weather, or are we likely to see more of it in the future?
That's a very good question. It is not unusual to see. We are in the storm season. We're in the Atlantic storm season. And this is, it is an Atlantic cyclonic low pressure system that has come in, and they do produce winds, of which there is a warning out again today, and heavy rain. The problem with this storm is that there is butting against an area of high pressure to the northeast. And rather than moving through quickly, which is what we expect and what we hope storms will do at this time of year, it's stalled over the country. And when that happens, they are like a washing machine sat over the country. So the rain is continual. We saw earlier this season Storm Anthony and Storm Agnes, and they moved through quite quickly. So while this is not an unusual meteorological event, this happens, this is an autumn storm, it is unusual, and in terms of rainfall, it's almost unprecedented in terms of that it's moving through very, very slowly. Storm Babet arrived earlier in the week and moved into the UK yesterday, and it's not going to be done with us really until tomorrow. So that's quite a long period of time for one storm system to be sat over the UK. In terms of going forward, we are seeing a change in the weather. We're seeing a change in the climate. Now, unusual extreme weather events have been linked to the possibility of, if we're talking about climate change. So there's a possibility that we may see more and more of these things. But for this time of year, it's really a case of we do expect these types of storms. We don't expect, or we hope they're not going to be quite as severe as this one, certainly in terms of rainfall. But it has happened before, and yes, it will happen again. OK. Well, that's not good to hear. But Nathan, thank you very much for bringing us up to date with all that. And if you're in the midst of all this weather, wherever you are in the country, I do hope you're OK. Do take care, and don't, for goodness sake, drive through any floodwaters, because it is so dangerous. Please don't risk it. Do send us your pictures, though, if you've got any to show us. We're getting plenty in. gbviews@gbnews.com. We're looking forward to seeing them and hopefully getting them on air. Well, you are watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. Lots more coming up on today's show. We're going to be discussing those latest by-election, disasters, quite frankly, for Rishi Sunak in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire. Could the no-confidence letters start flying in from Monday? Are the Tories headed for electoral oblivion? All of that plus more. First, your news with Sophia.
It's 1:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The UK has called on Israel to show military restraint in its war with Hamas. These are live pictures of Gaza, where smoke can be seen billowing on the skyline. Addressing a peace summit in Cairo, Foreign Secretary said he'd spoken to the Israeli government about its deputy to respect international law and the importance of preserving civilian lives. James Cleverly's efforts need to be made to prevent an escalation in violence.
We have a duty to work together to prevent instability from engulfing the region and claiming yet more lives. We must work together to prevent the tragic situation in Gaza becoming a regional conflict, because that is exactly what Hamas wants.
In the UK, tens of thousands of Palestinian supporters are taking part in a march in central London. They're calling for an end to the conflict in the Middle East and demanding the UK government stop supporting Israel's actions. The demonstrators are making their way to Downing Street. Storm Babet continues to pose a risk to life across some areas of the country. A red weather warning issued for parts of Aberdeenshire and Angus is due to end at 6 p.m. this evening. An amber warning for rain is in place across parts of England, with the Environmental Agency issuing 3 severe flood warnings in Derbyshire. And we're on TV, online, DAB+, and on radio. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Hello, welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. And we've been talking, haven't we, about Storm Babet, I think it's called, which is battering all parts of Britain. The Environment Agency has now issued 3 severe flood warnings, meaning a significant risk to life. There's major incidents that have been declared in Suffolk, South Yorkshire and Derbyshire in England. And if you're a football fan, well, a number of games are being called off as well. We will, of course, bring you the latest here on GB News. What I want to show you now, though, is a video of a sheepdog called Patsy. And in this terrible weather, in these floodwaters, she managed to rescue sheep from the flooded water. Now, her owner tweeted and said, "Thank God for little Patsy." She rescued three ewes which had been cut off by floodwater yesterday afternoon. And the sheep, well, you might be able to just see them. They were stranded on that little spot on the field, and that spot was getting smaller and smaller. So they decided to try and get them, and they thought, well, we'll see if Patsy the sheepdog will go in and rescue. They gave her the command, and she swam across. Just look at her there. Obviously, she is a very strong swimmer. Otherwise, I don't think that they would have given her the command. But she didn't have any problems at all, did she? And it meant that, well, quite a dangerous situation was averted. The sheep were saved. They got back onto dry land. And Patsy got a dog biscuit. But I think there's been lots of people on social media calling for her to be given a bit of steak as a reward. Absolutely lovely. Patsy the sheepdog there, absolute hero in this terrible weather. Now, back to politics, because Labour dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, this week by overturning 2 huge Conservative majorities in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire. So Keir Starmer claimed Labour was redrawing the political map by taking seats which had been comfortably Conservative ahead of the general election expected next year. In Mid-Bedfordshire, Alistair Strathern took the seat over his Tory rival. Well, what could this mean for the Prime Minister? Is he marching his party towards a 1997-style wipeout or worse? Joining me now is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Good to see you, Nigel. I normally see you here in the studio, but good to see you down the line. How are you reading this at the moment? Is Rishi Sunak's premiership at risk?
I think that's highly unlikely, until the general election, that is, but it's almost certainly at risk. The idea that the Tories could change yet another leader, I think is for the birds. I just don't think they'll do it. Now, yes, it's true that letters of no confidence can go in next week. Maybe there'll be 2 or 3 which actually do. But the idea that they would unseat Rishi Sunak at this stage, I think, is highly unlikely.
Who would they go for anyway? I mean, who would be the front runners? And they'd have a massive job to do, wouldn't they, in the space of 12 months? I mean, who would want that job, quite frankly?
They certainly would. And it wouldn't be a great job to have, knowing you're probably going to lose anyway at the end of it. It rather depends on, at the moment, the party are actually fighting for its heart and soul. So it depends a bit whether you go for a right-winger. Suella Braverman obviously is in the frame when it comes to that. Or you go for someone a little bit more on the left. Penny Mordaunt would be interested. And I think other people might step forward. But the idea of another leadership contest, especially after the disastrous Liz Truss premiership, I think is just not likely at the moment.
There's been calls for the Tory party to be more conservative to save itself. And there is a suggestion that the government is going to consider major tax cuts in a bid to win over traditional Tory voters.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens when the budget comes along. I mean, certainly the indication from the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is that tax cuts really are off the table until inflation can be brought down. and it's not at a level yet where it would be safe to actually go for tax cuts. So I think that's unlikely. And yes, you're right, there are calls for a more conservative party. And what that means really is tax cuts on one hand, the economy can't weather it. The other is over immigration, which is for Rishi Sunak to fulfill his promise to stop the boats. And that doesn't look like it's possible either. So I don't think any of these things are going to actually appease the right wing of the Tory party, because they ain't going to happen.
Stamp duty cuts, inheritance tax cuts, that's what's being claimed could be happening. Do you think that's unlikely then?
It may well be if inflation goes down, and you're talking about hitting sort of around about 2%, maybe 3%, then yes, it may well be that you could do tax cuts. You're looking there at a manifesto commitment, not something that's likely to happen within the next 12 months.
And just finally, Rishi Sunak has admitted that the by-elections produced obviously disappointing results, but says it was important to remember the context. I mean, quite ignominious circumstances, certainly, wasn't it, in Tamworth, what with Chris Pincher. Is he making excuses there, or do you think the context was important when it comes to the way voters voted?
Certainly, the Chris Pincher in Tamworth and Nadine Dorries in Mid Beds, both of them lost the Tories' votes because of the way they were behaving. It meant that both places didn't really have an MP. So certainly that didn't help. But I don't think you can take that as being the main reason. George Osborne said if you lose both seats, it's really Armageddon for the Tories. And I think he's probably right. That had, for instance, the Lib Dems taken Mid Beds, the Tories live to fight again. To lose both seats, and bear in mind that 2/3 of the voters there in both places are Tory voters. To lose both of them and not be able to at least keep one, like Mid Beds, really is a catastrophe.
OK, Nigel Nelson, senior political commentator, thank you so much. The Prime Minister says that he remains committed to delivering on the priorities of the British people. We'll see what happens. Now, 2 American hostages who were held by Hamas have been released. Judith and Natalie Ranan were taken hostage by the terrorist group from a kibbutz in southern East Israel 2 weeks ago today. That is them back in safe hands. They've been reunited with their family and have spoken to President Joe Biden. Earlier in the week, the US president said he was resolute in his support for Israel and visited the country in efforts to shore up diplomatic aid. The US president also said in an interview with CBS News last week that Hamas must be eliminated. But what is the wider US response to the war engulfing the Middle East? Well, joining me now is US political analyst Eric Ham. Good afternoon to you, Eric. Good to see you again. What do you think of Joe Biden's performance in the last week, going to Israel, that address in the Oval Office, which I think is only the second time he's done it, isn't it, during his presidency? How do you rank him?
Well, certainly the president has been visible. He has certainly expressed that the United States will continue to provide unyielding support, and the release of those 2 hostages certainly gave the president some good news. And now today we're learning that aid is now beginning to flow into Gaza. So the president is now finally beginning to get, I think, the news that he wants. But nevertheless, there are still many more hostages, and it appears as though Iran and perhaps some of its supporters are also beginning to ramp up its attacks on the region, which is something the president doesn't want to see happen. So it's a volatile time right now, of course, in the Middle East. And what we're seeing here is the president trying to throw everything at it to ensure that the situation doesn't descend into more chaos.
Yeah, and there's this peace summit taking place in Cairo today. Our foreign secretary is attending, the Palestinian president is there, Jordan's King Abdullah is there, but there's no American representative.
Yeah, I think that was a missed opportunity for many of the Arab nations, considering President Biden was actually in the region just a few days ago, and we know they canceled a meeting. They canceled a summit with him while there. Of course, that was in relation to the bombing of a hospital. But given the fact that you had the president of the United States that was actually on the ground, and we know that the United States supplies enormous support, not just to Israel, but to other countries, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. I thought that was a missed opportunity. But the fact that there is this summit taking place now does show signs that Arab nations are involved. But it just would have been better if they had the opportunity to have the conversation with President Biden while he was there, because we know the president is in this delicate dance to ensure that Israel's military offensive does not overreach, but at the same time wanting to make sure that the needs of the Palestinians are met. And the president would have been there to actually hear that if they hadn't canceled that meeting. But nevertheless, this summit taking place, it's better that it's happening as opposed to not happening at all.
Eric, we'll have to leave it there, I'm sorry, because we've got lots of bad weather here in the UK, which we need to talk about, which is causing problems for thousands of people. But really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, Storm Babet. River levels continuing to rise, officials have warned, amid widespread flooding caused by the storm, which in some areas is posing a risk to life. Various train operators are warning against travelling as lines are flooded. And one of the areas affected is Chesterfield, where the local MP, Toby Perkins, has said about 400 houses in his constituency have been flooded. And many people have no idea where they're going to be living. Well, Toby Perkins can join us now on GB News. Toby, tell us what's going on then, what the latest situation in Chesterfield is.
So, by and large, the waters have are receding, but as always is the case with floods, the waters disappearing doesn't in any way end the problem. So, we have got very serious issues in terms of the number of people that are no longer able to be in their properties. You're looking, I think, on your screen there at Chatsworth Road, which is where I am right now, and is the waters have all gone, but many people there are unable to stay in the properties. Many businesses are unable to be used. I've also been up in the Birdhome area, which was flooded, and water's still flooding probably at least 30 houses there. But we estimate as many as 400 people were effectively made homeless last night. Many of them stayed at the Queen's Park Sports Centre last night, and the council are in the process of doing the arduous work of attempting to find alternative accommodation, both in the very short term and in the longer term, for those people who aren't going to be able to return home.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this yesterday with Storm Babet battering parts of eastern Scotland, and there was a concern that some people there might not even be able to get back home in time for Christmas. So bad was the damage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in our experience, when you've been flooded, particularly those in rented accommodation, it can be 6 to 9 months before people are back in their properties. Obviously there needs to be a complete dehumidifying, get the dampness out. Many of these properties have got basements that have been flooded, and even getting the water out of them is going to be very difficult. So yeah, there's very significant issues. Unfortunately, in Chesterfield, many of the people affected are in areas that have been flooded before, and so actually getting flood insurance is very difficult. So I met a lot of people today who simply won't be insured and have basically lost everything. So yeah, really very difficult situation.
Yeah, it's so difficult for them. And I don't know whether this is your constituency, is it? But emergency crews rescued 20 people from a care home.
Yes, yeah, that's right. We've had, the fire service have been absolutely wonderful, and I had an opportunity to thank a crew today, but they're there attempting tonight, or this afternoon rather, to get an 80-year-old man to leave his property. He didn't want to leave, even though the whole ground floor was underwater, and he he didn't want to leave partly because he got dogs, and but the council is accommodating the dogs as well as the people. So yeah, the fire service has been great, but it has been very difficult indeed.
And what are the roads like in terms of travelling? Do you echo calls for people not to travel if they don't need to?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chatsworth Road is now clear, but Derby Road, A61, Sheffield to Derby Road is still blocked. The road to the hospital is now clear, but it is very difficult to move about Chesterfield north and south. The other basically runs, across the town. And so I would definitely say if people don't have to travel, then they shouldn't do.
And I think there was football today, wasn't there? Chesterfield were playing. Has that been cancelled?
Yes, it has, yeah. And not because the pitch was unplayable, but because simply of these travel concerns.
OK, so what would be your advice to people in your area and people in the country in general? You've seen, up close and personal what the situation's like.
So, I mean, for people in Chesterfield, if they need any help, they need to go to the Queen's Park Sports Centre where an emergency unit is set up. They're helping people with accommodation both immediately and attempting to make longer term arrangements. They're also supporting people just in terms of drinks and food and other things. So it's important we have a strong understanding as to who is affected. So anyone affected should go there. I think more broadly, I would say, one of the issues that's been caused is people attempting to drive through very serious sort of floods and get in their cars.
Toby, I'm so sorry. I know we're going to have to leave it, but people absolutely do need to be careful. Stay indoors. Stay with GB News. Talk to you again shortly.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Hello and welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Pip Thompson, and for the next hour I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. I'll keep you up to date on the stories that really matter to you, like this storm Babet coming up this hour. Yeah, 3 people have died and at least 40,000 homes are without power as the storm hits Britain. A second red weather alert in a week is in place in eastern parts of Scotland, with torrential rain forecast for the rest of the UK. Aid trucks finally enter the Egypt-Gaza crossing with vital humanitarian supplies. Britain's Foreign Secretary says it cannot be a one-off. Meanwhile, Israel says the number of hostages being held in Gaza is now 210, with the latest live from Israel. Can Rishi Sunak survive? Following 2 disastrous by-election results, are Tory MPs about to turn on their leader? Or will they show some loyalty and hope the Prime Minister can turn their fortunes around? And do get in touch. Send me your thoughts on GB Views at gbnews.com, or you can message me on our socials. We also want to see your weather pictures and videos. How is Storm Babet affecting you? First, let's get your latest news headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The UK has called on Israel to show military restraint in its war with Hamas. These are live pictures of Gaza, where there appears to have been several strikes with black smoke billowing on the skyline. Addressing a peace summit in Cairo, the UK's Foreign Secretary said he's spoken to the Israeli government about its duty to respect international law and the importance of preserving civilian lives. James Cleverly also told the conference that we need efforts to be made to prevent an escalation in violence.
We have a duty to work together to prevent instability from engulfing the region and claiming yet more lives. We must work together to prevent the tragic situation in Gaza becoming a regional conflict, because that is exactly what Hamas wants.
Aid has started flowing into Gaza, with the Rafah crossing opening for the first time in 2 weeks. Trucks carrying supplies have reached southern Gaza, the first convoy of humanitarian aid since Israel began its siege 12 days ago. Israel bombarded the territory and imposed a blockade, preventing the delivery of food, water and fuel after Hamas's terror attack on October the 7th. The group says today's delivery won't be enough to change the catastrophic medical conditions in Gaza. Also at the summit in Cairo, Secretary-General of United Nations Antonio Guterres says Gaza needs much more than aid trucks.
Full trucks on one side, empty stomachs on the other. Those trucks need to move as quickly as possible in a massive, sustained and safe way from Egypt into Gaza. A 20-truck convoy of the Egyptian Red Crescent is moving today. And I want to express my deep gratitude to Egypt for the essential role Egypt is playing in this regard. But the people of Gaza need a commitment for much, much more. A continuous delivery of aid to Gaza at the scale that is needed.
Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has vowed to continue to fight until all hostages being held by Hamas are freed. It's after 2 American citizens, Judith Raanan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie, were released yesterday. Hamas says the decision was made on humanitarian grounds and was secured after an agreement with the Qatari government. It's believed more than 200 people are still being held by the terrorist group. Tens and thousands of Palestinian supporters are taking part in a march in London. The Palestinian Solidarity Campaign says the protesters will be calling for an end to the violence in the Middle East. Campaign director Ben Jamal says the UK government needs to stop supporting Israel's actions.
We want the violence to end, so we're calling for an immediate ceasefire so that necessary humanitarian aid can be safely delivered to the people of Gaza. We are here today to assert the truth that violence will ultimately not end until you address the root causes of violence, and that is Israel's decades-long imposition of a system of military occupation and apartheid upon the people of Palestine. And we are marching to Downing Street to deliver a message to our political leadership that you need to end your complicit support for this system of oppression.
The Environment Agency is warning the flooding is likely to continue in areas near major rivers until Tuesday. It comes as Storm Babet continues to pose a risk to life across some areas of the country. A red weather warning issued for parts of Aberdeenshire and Angus is due to end at 6 p.m. this evening. An amber warning for rain is in place across parts of England, with the Environment Agency issuing 3 severe flood warnings in Derbyshire. Recycling in England will be standardised from 2026. The plan will see homes, businesses and schools recycling the same materials. There will also be a once-a-week minimum food waste collection to reduce the amount going to landfill. It's all part of the government's drive to simplify the process. Current recycling rates in England are just over 44%, which has been the same for the last decade. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to you.
Welcome back. A massive pro-Palestinian march is occurring in central London today in protest against the Israeli bombardment of Gaza, as several European countries move to ban the protests. This Saturday's march has been organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, along with groups including Friends of Al-Aqsa, Stop the War Coalition, Muslim Association of Britain and the Palestinian Forum in Britain. Let's cross over to the protests now and get the latest with GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, just reading that about 70,000 people are taking part. There must be quite a big police presence there.
There is a huge police presence here today. We've now moved down to Trafalgar Square and you can see the protests just passing me now. They're heading to Whitehall where they plan to deliver a petition to number 10 Downing Street. There are 1,000 police officers on the streets today policing this march, and they have another march to police as well. At the same time as this one, the main one, there is also a splinter march taking place between the Egyptian and Turkish embassies near Oxford Street. Now that march is self-confessed supporters of a group which is a sort of arm's length body of Hamas. So in some ways that one's more difficult to protest than this, although this one is of course much bigger. Now the challenge for the police is that the organisers of this rally have said that they plan to have a similar rally every Saturday for the foreseeable future until what they call the bombardment of Palestine by Israel has finished. So this is going to be an enormous challenge for the Metropolitan Police, not just today, but in the weeks and probably months ahead.
And has there been any sign of problems so far, Olivia? Has it been what you would call peaceful?
From what we've seen of the march, of course, we only get a snapshot, but from what we've seen of it, it has been peaceful. The Metropolitan Police and politicians, including the Home Secretary, have been worried about chanting, potential anti-Semitic chanting taking place at a rally like this. So far, we haven't heard any of that, and from what we can see, it is peaceful. But I have to reiterate, of course, we are only witnessing one of these two marches, and the other march, the more controversial one, which is taking place near Oxford Street, could have more tension exacerbated by that march. So it'll be really interesting to see at the end of the day what's coming out of both these two marches.
OK, Olivia, thanks very much for that. Well, as thousands take to London streets today to protest Israeli strikes on Gaza, many countries in Europe have banned pro-Palestinian protests. Should Britain follow suit? And when does protest become hateful incitement? Well, joining me now is political commentator Matthew Stadlen and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. Good afternoon to you both. Thanks for joining me to talk about this. Matthew, let's start with you. Where do you stand on this issue? Should Britain follow parts of Europe and ban these protests?
I think we have to stand by freedom of speech. The idea of banning tens of thousands of people from protesting peacefully, if that's what they're going to do, doesn't sit easily with me at all. Having said that, any anti-Semitism whatsoever needs to be clamped down on very, very strongly by the police.
What about this chanting that is causing great concern? I mean, do you think that is an issue? Do you think that is a potential crime?
I just read the Metropolitan Police's statement that they issued on Twitter, and I think they, broadly speaking, got it right. They were very clear that anti-Semitism would not be accepted on this march. Arrests could be made, of course, and they don't have to be made at the march itself. There'll be strong surveillance, I would have hoped. This controversial phrase that we may hear being chanted, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that is deeply problematic, because if it means the eradication of Israel, I would argue that's anti-Semitic. But at the moment, it seems the police will not clamp down on that particular chant.
What about the concern that these protests could now be happening week after week as this conflict deepens, and therefore comes the risk to security, increasing risk to our security?
My main concern is, and I'm Jewish myself, is for the Jewish communities of London, that they are not in any way harassed or threatened. That, of course, would be an absolute disgrace. It's a hallmark of a civilized society that we're allowed to protest peacefully, but that mustn't spill into anything else. I know there is deep concern amongst some Jewish people in this country. The government is right to do everything it can to reassure those Jewish British citizens, but at the same time, I don't, as I say, think you can stop tens of thousands of people marching. I hope the vast majority of whom will be marching in favour of peace and not in any way antagonistically.
Belinda, let me bring you in. What is your take in this? People marching in favour of peace, they're not pro-Hamas.
I think it is very naive to imagine these protests aren't going to be infiltrated by Hamas sympathisers, anti-Semites, radical Islamists. They are going to be the sort of feeding ground for those types to turn up. And I've met many of those, the likes of them, at places like Speaker's Corner over the years. They exist. And for me, it's about how are we making our British Jewish communities feel with these deeply insensitive, now very frequent, massive protests that do include chants, that do include people who have behaved outrageously, whether it's wearing massively offensive imagery of paragliders or chanting with threatening slogans. I think there should have been a time for mourning, at least out of respect for the worst terrorist atrocity, the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. I feel utterly sickened that we have submitted to this. I think before the very first protest happened, the government should have come out very clearly and said we are going to have a time of mourning, a time of reflection, and at least give some respect to the Jewish community who've been deeply wounded by this and who are frightened. I have many Jewish friends who are now frightened to walk out into the streets when one of these protests happen to be going on. It's the fear it creates. It's the climate of fear for our vulnerable Jewish community at the moment. It's not acceptable. And I think shame on us we didn't come out stronger straight away and say, not on our streets, not so soon after a massacre. We protect our British Jewish community first and foremost.
But we can see from the pictures that it is very peaceful. The people that you're talking about, the dissenters, they do seem to be very few and far between. And Palestinians, with what has happened to them down the decades, they have an absolutely legitimate right to protest, don't they?
I support the right to protest. I'm talking about the timing here. I feel the timing is so wounding and so deeply offensive. And
Matthew,
you can
let me just ask you. I can see you shaking your head there. Belinda, just hang on.
Yeah.
I saw Matthew shaking his head. I just want to bring you in on that. The timing of this is wrong. There should have been a period of mourning.
I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why I don't agree with that. The reason is because 1,400 Israelis, many of them civilians, were simply murdered by medieval savages who came through from Gaza. These are terrorists. Whatever the BBC wants to call them, they are terrorists. The truth is also that Palestine, Gaza, is now facing an existential humanitarian crisis. Untold numbers of children have died in Gaza. We are seeing people risking starvation, risking dying of thirst as a consequence of the blockade and of the bombing. So there are two things that are going on at once. One is the utter unspeakable atrocities committed by Hamas terrorists in Israel, and the other is the ferocity of Israel's response. I believe Israel does have a right to defend itself, but proportionality is a key word here. Not everyone can agree on what that means in this context. For me, it has to involve Israel obeying international law, and there are serious question marks at the moment as to whether they have or not. So in that context, I understand why people are marching for the Palestinians. I just hope that some of those marchers will also bear banners demanding the release by Hamas of Israeli hostages, and I'm not holding my breath.
I mean, what is a huge problem, Matthew, is we keep seeing, which I find so insensitive, is the people that have been tearing down the posters of those missing hostages. I find that utterly appalling. They're human beings, aren't they?
I find that sickening. I find it absolutely sickening. I want to be completely clear here. What Hamas did in Israel, and anyone who supports that, sickens me to the pits of my stomach. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't protect our freedoms in Britain, which include the right to protest peacefully.
Belinda, as we keep seeing the images... go on then. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, I'm really sorry, but there is a hugely intimidating factor to these protests for our Jewish community. As has been reported, there are two going on at the same time, one very controversial. Can you imagine what it must be like for London British Jews to sort of have to say to their children, you can't go out today, sorry, you can't go down to the shops, you can't go near Marble Arch, you can't go, all because of these protests. It wouldn't be happening if there were pro-Israel protests. They seem to be much more peaceful and seem to be
But Belinda, we're looking at the pictures now. They are peaceful. We're not seeing lots of violence.
Do you see any Israel? But that is because I think Jewish people have had to stay at home today. I think it's because, have you noticed there are no Israeli flags? There's, as you said, no calls to help the hostages, some of which are British. There's none of that around, no placards around for that kind of balanced peace. I think it is intimidating whether they are peaceful or not. The frequency and timing of these mass protests are intimidating for, I believe, London British Jews, or certainly many of them, and my friends included.
Matthew, is it intimidating?
I think the reason this conversation that we're having at the moment is so worthwhile on GB News is precisely because there are contesting interests here. I agree with Belinda that some Jewish people in London, no doubt amongst my friends, do feel intimidated and scared today, and that is deeply regrettable. And that is why I call on the police to make absolutely sure that any hint of anti-Semitism is clamped down on, whether immediately at the march or as a consequence of surveillance that the police are conducting during today. At the same time, I reiterate, we have very precious freedoms in this country, and I believe that people have the right to protest freely and also peacefully.
OK, you have both made your opinions very clear. Really appreciate your contributions this afternoon. Matthew Stadlen and Belinda de Lucy, thank you both for talking to me and debating on GB News Saturday. You are watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. Plenty more to come, including the very latest on Storm Babet, which is sweeping across the UK and causing enormous problems for so many of you. Do stay with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. Train operators around the UK have advised customers not to travel today due to widespread disruption following Storm Babet. Just hearing now that London's King's Cross station is closed because of overcrowding. Passenger numbers on the concourse and on platforms is bringing severe rail disruption. Network Rail is having to bring in crowd control measures. Well, also affected is LNER, Avanti West Coast and Northern Rail, all warning against travelling because lines are widely flooded. The Environment Agency has warned that flooding is likely to continue in areas near major rivers until Tuesday. Meanwhile, people in up to 100 homes across Angus and East Scotland have been rescued from their flooded homes, with some being airlifted. And here's a picture of a flooded park. This has been sent in by Jeffrey in Evesham. I'm not exactly sure where Evesham is. Maybe somebody can let me know in my ear, because I know Evesham in Worcestershire. Maybe it's Evesham in Worcestershire. Jeffrey, ping me a line so I can get clarity on your location. But let's talk to Donica McCarthy, who is director of the Climate Media Coalition, who can talk to me now. Donica, what do you make of Storm Babet then and all the problems it's causing?
Well, of course, my heart goes out to the families and people immediately impacted by it. It's a real disaster for those people. But what we need to understand is that this is a pattern related to climate change. The UN says there'll be 7% more moisture in the air per 1 degree rise in temperature. That is exactly what's happening in Britain. We are 9% wetter now than we were in previous decades because we've had 1 degree rise in temperatures. So what we need now to be doing, the message of Babet, is that what the government's National Infrastructure Committee said is we're unprepared and we need to start preparing seriously now for these type of floods.
So what should the preparation have been as far as you're concerned if we should have been able to know this was happening?
Well, it may seem an unusual thing to say, but one of the things that we really need to address is the devastation that we have on our landscape. We have designed our landscapes to facilitate flood flowing down the hillsides into our towns and cities by removing the woodlands. We need to restore the upland woodlands, restore the beavers so that they trap the water upland and slow it down. And actually, one of the extraordinary things, I mean, you may say, why is he talking about beavers in relation to floods? Beavers, when they were in the natural landscape, they built dams that protected towns down rivers. So what we need to be doing is a massive program of replanting our woodlands and re-allowing the beavers to put natural dams in our upland rivers and streams and lakes.
Is it too late to do that? Some people would say, you know, this is as it's going to be now in the future.
Well, it's too late to stop climate change. 1 degree rise, we're already there. But if you're at 1 degree, what you can imagine is going to be at 2 degrees or 3 degrees. An absolute nightmare. So what we need to be doing, we can start now, and the Met Office, predicts that these extreme weather floods will increase tenfold by the 2080s. We can get a lot of woodland in, we can get a lot of natural protections in, we get a lot of beavers into the landscape in the next 30 years that would help protect us from the disastrous implications of what's happening by the 2080s, which is around 50 years' time.
OK. Donica McCarthy, really appreciate you talking to me, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. Thanks very much. Well, we've been seeing pictures of some of the devastation that Storm Babet is causing across Britain, including in Wales. But what I want to show you is an heroic sheepdog called Patsy, who has been rescuing some ewes from flooded water. Her owner has tweeted saying, "Thank God for little Patsy." Can you see her in those pictures? She swims across the floodwater to rescue those ewes. And in a few seconds, you'll see she pushes them onto some dry land. She rescued the sheep cut off by that deep water. And it meant that the farmers didn't have to get their feet didn't need to get their feet wet stepping in to help, or I should say wading in to help. So little Patsy there, brilliant sheepdog. No doubt getting an extra dog biscuit tonight. Here she comes, happy as Larry, trotting over to her owner. She didn't even look tired at all. Well done, Patsy. Now, Labour was dealt a double by-election blow, or Labour dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak this week by overturning 2 huge Conservative majorities in Tamworth and in Mid-Bedfordshire. What could this mean for the Prime Minister? Is he marching his party towards a 1997-style wipeout or worse? Joining me now is someone who may welcome this. It's former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards. Good to see you, Paul. How do you read it then? Is it 1997 all over again? Is it Armageddon, as I think the former Chancellor George Osborne is predicting?
Well, I wish, but no, it's not, I'm afraid. I think the polls are overstating the case, and I think that Rishi Sunak does have a majority in Parliament. John Major didn't have a majority in 97, but the Tories have a cushion of about 60-odd seats. So that's why Labour is saying, first of all, we need a general election now, but secondly, no complacency at all. These results are stunning, and they come off the back of results in Scotland, where we won, and in the north of England, where we won, now in the Midlands and the home counties. So we're winning everywhere. People are going straight from Conservative to Labour, not stopping along the way with the Lib Dems, which is important. But, there's such a long way to go. And I saw Keir Starmer in Liverpool a couple of weeks ago at the conference saying this. There is no room for complacency. So all the stuff about 97, afraid not.
One of the defences was that, well, this was going to happen to the Tories yesterday because the governments of the day never win by-elections.
Well, they do sometimes, but what they usually do is they lose to the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems have got a great talent for picking up these amazing by-election triumphs. But actually, the votes went to Labour. So people are changing their mind about Labour. Even GB News viewers are thinking about Labour for the first time, perhaps, and thinking about voting Labour for the first time. And so the switches have been from one party straight to the not via a protest party.
Oh, sorry, Paul. We'll keep trying you. It does. Your sound went a bit funny then. Do you think that people are starting to connect to Sir Keir Starmer now? Because there's always been a little bit of a question mark about him for many, hasn't there?
Well, that's a really reasonable question because it is about leadership and character. But we're not organising a stag do, are we? It's not about who we're going to invite out for a drink. It's about who's going to run the country. Who is going to administer the public services that we pay for. And I think Starmer has shown he can run things and he's in charge. And look at the way he's changed the Labour Party. Just 3 years ago, people were writing the Labour Party off after the terrible Corbyn years. So actually, he's a serious man. It may not be your best mate, but he is somebody who can run the place. And I think after all the chaos of the last few years, 4 prime ministers in a row, crashing the economy and the rest of it, maybe it's in time for somebody who's a steady hand at the tiller. A little bit of stability. I'd like to wake up, and not have any politics in the news for a day, just where the government hasn't done anything other than just run the place sensibly. Wouldn't that be great?
You said there's still a long way to go, although it feels like, an election a year away. A year can go so very, very quickly. What does Labour need to do to maintain this lead? Or what does Rishi Sunak need to do to catch up?
Well, Sunak's tried to sort of get down the Trumpian the path of sort of populist politics, but after his conference, he got no bounce at all. So I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, he seems to be in a very dark place. Labour needs to carry on reassuring people, step up its modernisation to show that we are capable of running the economy. Rachel Reeves done a great job on that so far, but there are loads of people, I know this is true, are still making their minds up, but still not wholly happy with Labour. There isn't the same jubilation. And just to finish off where you started, it doesn't feel like 97 where people are smiling in the streets and tripping their way down to the polling station to vote Labour in the sunshine. It's a very different situation. The economy is in a very different state. And so Labour has to carry on reassuring people and to ensure that the people that are on board now stay on board over the next year. And you're right, it could be January 2025, the general election. So it's an awfully long way to go.
But, what if Rishi Sunak, under his premiership, met his target of cutting inflation by half? Things could look very different for him if that happens, couldn't it? If he hits one of his main targets?
Well, the Bank of England projects this anyway. So, I mean, he chose a target that he knew he was going to hit, I'm afraid. It was a bit of it's not actually that difficult to do that. If there is a little bit of economic green shoots, though, if people do feel a little bit more confident, that might play to Labour's advantage. It may be that people feel that they can take a little punt and change government rather than, cling to the government they've got. So you never know. Actually, optimism in the economy might not necessarily to go to Sunak's advantage. People don't vote to say thank you, do they? They vote for their own future and to sort of think about their own children's future. So it might be that economic green shoots actually help Labour a little bit.
Interesting. Former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards, thanks so much for talking to me this afternoon. You are watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. Plenty to bring you in the last half hour, including a look ahead to tonight's big game. I wonder what that is. England take on 2019 World Cup champions South Africa at the Stade de France. We'll be discussing what their chances are. All of that and more to come. First, let's get your headlines with Sophia.
It's 2:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The UK has called on Israel to show military restraint in its war with Hamas. These are live pictures of Gaza, where there appears to have been several strikes with black smoke seen billowing on the skyline. Addressing a peace summit in Egypt, the UK's Foreign Secretary said he's spoken to the Israeli government about its duty to respect international law and the importance of preserving civilian lives. James Cleverly also told the conference efforts need to be made to prevent an escalation of violence.
We have a duty to work together to prevent instability from engulfing the region and claiming yet more lives. We must work together to prevent the tragic situation in Gaza becoming a regional conflict, because that is exactly what Hamas wants.
In the UK, tens and thousands of Palestinian supporters are taking part in a march in central London. They're calling for an end to the conflict in the Middle East and demanding the UK government stop supporting Israel's actions. The demonstrators are making their way to Downing Street. The Environment Agency is warning floods are likely to continue near major rivers in England until Tuesday. Storm Babet is dumping heavy rain in parts of the East Midlands and South Yorkshire. The Met Office has also issued a red weather warning for Aberdeenshire and Angus, which is due to end at 6 o'clock this evening. On TV, online, on DAB+, radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Hello and welcome back. World leaders are meeting in Cairo in a desperate plea for peace. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has been speaking during the summit, and he has been urging Israel, the Israeli military, to show restraint as expectation grows of an imminent invasion of the Gaza Strip by the Israeli military. Now, it comes as the IDF are reporting that some 210 hostages are now being held by Hamas in Gaza. The Rafah border crossing to Egypt has finally opened for much-needed humanitarian aid. Let's cross live to GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who is in Tel Aviv. Charlie, I know you've had a little bit of a situation in the last few minutes. Tell us what's been happening.
Yeah, well, after a lull of nearly 48 hours, rocket attacks once again occurred in Tel Aviv. We were forced into the shelter once again, but it does represent, I think, the slight degradation that has occurred to Hamas missile strike capabilities, and that they've focused so intensely on the south in the last 2 days. Their ability to target Tel Aviv has likely dipped after the number of strikes that we've seen from the IDF on the Gaza Strip in the last 48 hours, but there have been some successful impacts in Sderot, a town in the south where people have been evacuated, many of them now gathering here in Tel Aviv. And also there are reports in the last hour of 2 injuries to some Thai nationals in the north of Israel after anti-tank guided missiles were fired and rockets were fired from southern Lebanon, likely by Lebanese Hezbollah, into northern Israel. The IDF has released footage of them striking those teams with what they say is a drone attack on those militants in southern Lebanon. Thai nationals have been particularly affected by this conflict. So many of them work here as seasonal workers, especially in the agricultural sector in the south and the north. Some 40 nationals from Thailand either dead or feared missing. So a very significant impact, and they continue to be found in the casualty list and indeed those wounded by rocket attacks. But the situation in Gaza, we are still seeing that convoy preparing itself. Message to Western powers. We know that Japan, Italy and the UK represented at that summit, that they want to see restraints on the Israeli action on the Gaza Strip, but it's unlikely to happen. The constant visit of Western world leaders to Israel in the last week has been described by some as a sort of babysitting, essentially affirming the pain achieved and felt in Israel, inflicted on them by those appalling attacks on October the 10th, but essentially saying to them, we feel your pain, but be mindful, be careful, because what happens next could spill into that wider regional escalation. And James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, saying at that peace summit in Cairo this afternoon that he does not want to see a wider escalation, and calling on regional partners, in particular the Arab powers, to do what they can to prevent that. But despite those comments, Lebanese Hezbollah, that Iranian proxy, continuing to engage with the IDF and still killing Israeli soldiers, but also injuring civilians in the north.
As we talk to you, Charlie, we are seeing smoke over Gaza, which could well be the result of Israeli airstrikes. I hope we can also show pictures of the destruction that is being caused in Gaza by these airstrikes, the Israeli military targeting, they say, Hamas infrastructure. We also must speak about the Rafah crossing that is now open. Do we know how long that is going to stay open for? And will any foreign nationals be allowed out?
We're still waiting for information on both of those fronts, Pip, because the information supply there is so sudden. For just a moment, it can go from nothing to everything. And that's what happened this morning, where with an hour's notice, we were informed that the crossing would open imminently. And then some 80 minutes later, we saw footage of the first trucks going in, carrying medical supplies, medical equipment and food. But crucially, no fuel. That's probably been a red line for the Israelis because they don't want to see anything incendiary going towards that strip, as they fear that Hamas could hijack aid going in. Of course, the Egyptian Red Crescent and the UN taking particular guard of any supplies that enter into the strip, under observation from IDF intelligence and air assets. But the fuel is required, they say, in the Gaza Strip because of the fact that they are claiming that hospitals are running out of power for their generators. They have relied on generators to conduct medical opportunities and activities inside the Gaza Strip. Due to that electricity cut-off, there will not be any electricity flowing into the Gaza Strip while this bombardment continues. There was a possibility that some water supply could return, but again, we've not seen evidence of that after the Israeli energy minister claimed the taps would open 5 days ago. And this comes, of course, in the context of the IDF wanting the best part of 1 million people to flee from the north to the south. But in order to do that, to sustain that transport, many people in the south on the Gaza Strip there observing, saying that there isn't sufficient humanitarian support to make that a conducive exercise for the internally displaced peoples. But regardless of how many people flee south, it looks as though the IDF are set to continue their bombardment. Last night, the heaviest in several nights, and those troops still gathering on the border with the Gaza Strip, a convoy of armour and infantry. That ground invasion seems imminent the next couple of days, we suspect highly likely in that time period, as Yoav Gallant, the IDF defence minister, sets out his strategy for that invasion.
Charlie Peters in Tel Aviv, thank you. Back here, and train operators around the UK have advised customers not to travel today due to widespread disruption following Storm Babet. LNER, Avanti West Coast and Northern Rail have all warned against travelling as lines are widely flooded. We are also hearing that London's King's Cross station is shut because of overcrowding. We will try and bring you more on that. The Environment Agency has warned that flooding is likely to continue in areas near major rivers until Tuesday. People in up to 100 homes across Angus in East Scotland have been rescued from their flooded homes, with some being airlifted. We've been asking you for your stories and your videos across the country of what the situation is like near you. Lindsay in Scotland has sent us this. Flooding on that road. I'm not entirely sure which part of Scotland that is. It might be eastern Scotland, but at least the roads are passable because they're not like that in many other places. Well, Nathan Rao is a weather journalist and can join me now. So many parts of the country, Nathan, affected now by Storm Babet.
Yeah, this is the storm that moved in sort of at the start of the weekend, but is continuing to wreak havoc, particularly across Scotland. And it is Scotland, East Scotland, where the red Met Office warning is still in place. Now, this is a red warning that was issued for the start of the weekend. It's been extended until 6 p.m. tonight. There is also a warning for wind, and there are also yellow and amber weather warnings in place across the region. And as you mentioned, authorities, certainly in Scotland, ScotRail and Traffic Scotland, are warning people to please check services before they travel. Don't travel unless it is absolutely essential, certainly until tomorrow, when their engineers are going to be looking to make sure that routes are still safe. But not only Scotland, as you mentioned, across England as well. The English Environment Agency has issued a number of severe weather warnings and flood warnings and flood alerts across a large swathe of England, particularly around rivers that are pushed to breaking point now, with this intense deluge of rain that has really been non-stop in some regions for the last 24 hours.
Nathan, the Environment Agency is warning that flooding from major rivers could continue until Tuesday now. Ongoing flooding, they say, probable on larger rivers, including the Severn, Ouse and Trent.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Now, the Environment Agency has named its risk areas as Anglia, East Midlands, West Midlands, Wales, Yorkshire, Humber, all of these places where the rivers have been, growing over the last 24 hours. Now, the thing with these heavy rainfall events is that the lag effect can last a couple of days, where rivers take a while for their river levels to lower and for them to become safe again. So flooding is going to be an ongoing risk, even after this storm has passed through tonight and into tomorrow morning, into the start of next week. Flooding is still going to be a risk, and I would imagine we will still see flood warnings in those areas.
And people do need to take this seriously, don't they? They need to be careful. Don't go out in your car and drive through something that you think looks all right. Oh, it's only a puddle, you might say, and it's something very different.
Absolutely. Now, we talk about weather warnings a lot. In my business, we talk about them a lot. But red warnings are not issued lightly. Now, to put that into context, the last red weather warning from the Met Office for rain was in 2020 during Storm Dennis. And so it's been a long time. And the Scottish, the Environment Agency warns that 30 centimetres of rain, floodwater, can move a car. So it doesn't take much floodwater to make it very unsafe, both for driving and for walking, and also coastal regions as well. Stay away from the coasts while the river levels, while the winds are high, because it can cause huge waves to overtop over the coastal defences. And anywhere where there's likely to be flooding, really, until those flood warnings and those weather warnings have expired, it is best to stay safe and stay away from the flooded areas.
Such valuable advice there. Nathan, thank you so much. And while you are staying indoors, well, you might be watching England's semi-final against South Africa tonight. No doubt, tonight's opponents, who beat hosts France 29-28 in an epic quarter-final last Saturday, will be challenging for England, who, of course, lost in the 2019 World Cup final. The winner will face the All Blacks after they comfortably beat Argentina last night. So, joining me is the rugby reporter at the Daily Mail, Alex Bywater. Good to see you again, Alex. What have England got to do?
Well, they've got an epic challenge on their hands, haven't they? As you've alluded to there, the team that they lost to quite convincingly in the 2019 final. There's no sort of physical challenge for a rugby team in the test arena than South Africa. So that's their first challenge. If they don't match them physically, I think it'll be good night for Steve Borthwick's side. But there is a bit of degree of positivity around a shock happening. South Africa are still heavy favourites, and rightly so, after beating France. But England, they can produce a big performance. We saw 4 years ago, no one expected them to beat the All Blacks in the semi-final, and they did that. So let's see what happens. It certainly promises to be an exciting game. Hopefully it's going better than the cricket, which England are struggling against South Africa at the moment.
OK, that's not good news to hear. In terms of the squad then, is the lineup likely to be the same as it was against Fiji?
Well, what's interesting about the lineup for this weekend is that South Africa are known for the replacements that they bring on, their forwards that they bring on early in the second half. It's become known as sort of the bomb squad that they have. And England's head coach Steve Borthwick has tried to replicate that. So this weekend, he's got guys like Ellis Genge, Kyle Sinclair and Ollie Chessum on the bench. So there has been a couple of changes. Freddie Stewart is back at fullback as well because Marcus Smith has been ruled out. So there's a handful of changes from the Fiji game. And it's going to be interesting to see how Steve Borthwick deploys the bench, how early he brings on the forwards to sort of counteract what South Africa are going to do tactics-wise as well.
I think it was Clive Woodward, the World Cup winning coach, who said that England are capable of shocking the world.
Yeah, and it would be a big shock, wouldn't it? I think South Africa are rightly favourites, as I alluded to, but there is a small chance. I think it's probably a 40% chance, but we've seen shocks in this World Cup already. I mean, no one would have thought, I don't think that Ireland and France would have both gone out in the quarterfinal stages. We saw that happen last weekend. Argentina as well beating Wales, that was a result not many people were predicting. So we can see upsets in that World Cups. They've happened before, and England fans, I'm sure, will be we'll be hoping for another one today. It's a long wait ahead of the game tonight.
What about the current Springboks team? Are they better than the team that lifted that Webb Ellis Trophy 4 years ago?
I think they are, and the main reason I say that is because all South African teams are known for their power, their forward physicality. But what this Springbok team is more of an attacking threat. I think they've got a different number 10 in Manny Libok. He's been preferred to Andre Pollard, and he's a wonderful attacking player. Out wide, their wings, Cheslin Kolbe and Kurtley Aarons, are a hugely dangerous attacking threats. So they're not just a team that can beat you up physically and dominate with scrum and line out. They can play attacking rugby, and we saw some of the breakaway tries they scored against France, which were fantastic, really. So they're a hugely entertaining team to watch. They're different to 2019 when they comfortably beat England in the final. So I guess on that, it leaves England, facing up to a big challenge.
And do they need to get those tries in early on? Quick answer.
Absolutely, that would be great. But I think even if they can't score tries, I'm not expecting England to be scoring 4 or 5 tries against the Boks, but some early penalties or drop goals maybe to get the scoreboard moving would be key. I think if England fall behind relatively early and significantly, I would think they would struggle to overturn that disadvantage.
OK, I'm keeping everything crossed. Alex Bywater, thank you so much. And thank you to you for your company on GB News Saturday with me, Pip Thompson. See you soon.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the rest of the day, the heavy rain across Scotland will finally begin to ease this evening. Elsewhere, it's actually also turning drier. We still have this area low pressure across the UK, so it will remain fairly changeable. Still the risk of a few showers, but thankfully, especially for Scotland, we start to lose the really heavy rain. So into this evening, you can trace that rain further northwards across the mainland parts of Scotland. Amber and red warnings will expire as we go through the course of the evening. So for most of us, as we go through the small hours of Sunday, it's a fairly dry picture. A few showers around, maybe also the odd mist and fog patch, and away from towns and cities, turning a little bit chillier compared to of late. So Sunday, we start off on a fairly bright note, any mist and fog quickly clearing. Still the risk of some showers, especially for Western Scotland, maybe parts of Western Wales, South West England too. But for many areas, it's a much brighter day. Some sunshine around, and certainly a day to take stock if you've unfortunately seen some flooding over the last few days. Temperatures for most of us around where they should be for the time of year, so around 10 to 12 in the north, potentially up into the mid-teens further south. Monday, we do start the day fairly dry, maybe quite chilly for Scotland. Northern Ireland, however, will see this heavy area of rain work its way in during the course of the day. That will spread its way further eastwards as we go through the course of next week, so staying unsettled for all of us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute.